It all started when I decided to visit my parents for Halloween. I hadn't seen them in months, and there was something about the nostalgia of going back home that made me feel comforted. It was one of those small towns where nothing ever seemed to change, where everything moved at a slower pace, and I could always count on my parents to be the same warm, familiar people they'd always been. I pulled into the driveway just as the sun was setting. The house looked exactly as I remembered it: white picket fence, the porch light glowing softly, pumpkins lined up along the front steps. But as soon as I stepped out of the car, I felt something off. The air was thick, too quiet. There was no wind, no rustle of leaves, no distant sound of kids trick-or-treating. Just silence. It clung to the place like a blanket, suffocating in its stillness. I knocked on the door, but before my fist could hit the wood a second time, it creaked open. My mother stood there, smiling wide, her arms outstretched. "Charlie." "Oh, it's been so long, come in," her voice was off, just a little too cheerful, too rehearsed. "Hey, Mom," I said, forcing a smile as I stepped inside. "Where's Dad?" "He's in the kitchen, sweetheart. We've been so excited for you to visit." Her tone was sing-songy, like she was overacting, as if she was trying to convince me how happy they were. But there was something behind her eyes, something unsettling. I stepped into the living room, and that's when I noticed the smell. It was faint, but unmistakable, something metallic, like old copper mixed with rotting meat. It was nauseating, but I kept it together, trying not to let my face betray the unease creeping up my spine. My dad appeared from the kitchen, holding a tray of cookies. His grin was wide, too wide, almost like it had been stretched across his face. His eyes locked onto me, but they didn't seem like his eyes. There was no warmth in them, just cold, glassy emptiness. "Charlie, my boy," he boomed, his voice echoing in the unnatural quiet. "Come sit, we've got your favorite cookies, and we can catch up. How's work been?" I hesitated, the sick feeling in my gut growing. Sure, Dad. Everything's good." I sat down at the table, my eyes darting between them. They looked the same faces, same clothes, but the way they moved, the way they talked. It was like watching actors who didn't quite know their roles. Every smile felt forced, every movement slightly too stiff, too deliberate. Mom brought out some tea, and I noticed her hands tremble ever so slightly as she placed the cup in front of me. "So tell us all about your life, dear," she said, her eyes not blinking, just staring. "We've missed you so much." I forced myself to smile, taking a sip of the tea to avoid looking directly at her. "Yeah, it's been busy, but, same old. How have you guys been?" "We've been perfect," Dad said, his grin still plastered across his face. "Absolutely, perfect." The silence stretched on for an uncomfortable beat too long. I fidgeted in my chair, trying to ignore the rising sense of dread twisting in my stomach. Something was seriously wrong, but I couldn't figure out what. Then, out of nowhere, Mom spoke again, her voice lower, almost mechanical. "It's been so nice to have the house full again." I froze. "What do you mean?" "Just like old times," she continued, as though I hadn't spoken. "It's been so quiet without you here. So empty." Yeah, Dad chimed in, his voice suddenly dropping into a sinister murmur. "So quiet. So very, very quiet." I swallowed hard, glancing at the clock on the wall. It hadn't moved since I arrived. The second hand was stuck in place, ticking endlessly in the same spot. "Mom." "Dad," I started, standing up slowly. "I think I should." Before I could finish, I heard a faint scraping sound. My eyes darted to the far corner of the room, where a shadow shifted. Something was moving beneath the floorboards. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, my pulse quickening. Mom and Dad didn't respond. They just sat there, staring at me with those vacant, hollow eyes, their smiles stretching wider and wider, until it didn't seem possible for their skin to hold. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, like nails on wood, desperate to get out. I backed away from the table, my heart racing, as a low, guttural moan echoed through the house. I think I need to go," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Stay," Mom said, her voice dropping to a low hiss. "Stay with us, Charlie. Stay, forever." Her face twitched, like her muscles were fighting to stay in place. Then her head jerked violently to the side, her neck cracking audibly, and she stood up, her movements stiff and unnatural. Dad followed suit, rising from his chair in the same jerky puppet-like manner. Their faces remained fixed in those unnatural smiles, but their eyes were dead. I stumbled back, knocking over my chair, and turned toward the front door, but it wasn't there. The hallway had shifted, the walls now extending into darkness where the door should have been. "What the?" I muttered, spinning around. They were moving toward me now, slow and deliberate, their hands twitching at their sides. "We missed you," Charlie Dad said, his voice distorted, like it was coming from someone or something else. "We've been waiting." I backed into the corner, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The floorboards beneath me started to creak, the scratching sound growing louder, more frantic. "Charlie," Mom whispered, her voice echoing around the room, "come home. Stay with us. Forever." Suddenly, the floor beneath me gave way, and I was falling, plummeting into darkness. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. The air down here was thick, choking, and I gagged as the overwhelming stench of decay filled my lungs. I scrambled to my feet, but my foot hit something soft. I looked down and screamed. It was a body. No bodies. Dozens of them, piled on top of each other, their faces twisted in agony, their limbs bent at impossible angles, and at the very top were my parents. But they were rotting. Their skin was pale and stretched tight over their bones, their mouths open in silent screams. "We've been waiting," a voice whispered behind me. I spun around, and there they were again, my parents. But this time their skin was melting, their bodies twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. They reached for me with skeletal hands, their faces no longer human. "Come home, Charlie," they said in unison, their voices layered with something ancient, something wrong. "Stay with us, forever." I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I ran as fast as I could, the sound of their footsteps echoing behind me. The darkness closed in around me, the walls shifting and closing off every exit. But no matter how fast I ran, their voices followed me. And then, just as I thought I had escaped, I heard the door slam behind me. The house. It had trapped me. And my parents, whatever they were now, weren't going to let me leave. I stumbled through the darkness, my hands clawing at the walls, trying to find some way out. But every corner I turned led me deeper into the maze that used to be my childhood home. My heart pounded in my chest, each breath ragged and shallow as the air seemed to thicken around me. The walls groaned, shifting ever so slightly, like they were alive, breathing, watching. Their voices still echoed from behind, closer now, distorted and wrong, as though they were speaking through mouths that no longer fit. "Charlie, stay with us." I stumbled again, my foot catching on something soft. I dared to look down, only to see more bodies strewn across the floor, half-rotted, eyes wide with terror, their mouths frozen in silent screams. I recognized some of them neighbors, old friends from the town, people I'd grown up with. They were all here, buried beneath the floor, piled up like forgotten corpses, their flesh twisted and decaying. How long had they been here? How long had my parents, those things, been living like this? I backed away, my eyes wide, my skin crawling with cold dread. And then I heard the creaking again, that awful, sickening sound of wood splintering under weight. The floor beneath me sagged, and I barely had time to react before something shot up from the ground, long, twisted arms, blackened and skeletal, reaching for me. I screamed and bolted down the hallway, my hand scraping against the peeling wallpaper as I ran. The walls were closing in, the space narrowing, forcing me to duck and weave, my body contorting unnaturally just to squeeze through. My chest was heaving, my legs burning, but I couldn't stop. If I stopped, they would catch me. "Charlie," their voices called again, closer this time. "You're home now." I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck and whipped around, but there was nothing there, just shadows, twisting and writhing like they were alive. The walls seemed to move, bending toward me, their surfaces pulsing with something dark, something alive beneath the plaster. Suddenly, I found myself in front of a door. The basement door. It was open just a crack, and from behind it, I could hear a faint humming. My mother's voice. No, I thought, backing away. Not down there. But the house shifted around me again, and I was forced closer to the door. There was no other way out, no other path. The hallway had vanished, replaced by a narrow, suffocating tunnel that led straight to the basement. My hands trembled as I reached for the door, pushing it open just enough to peek inside. The stairs descended into a thick, unnatural darkness, the kind that swallowed light. I hesitated, my heart hammering in my chest, but the sound of footsteps, heavy, dragging footsteps behind me, made the choice for me. I stepped down into the basement. Each step creaked beneath my weight, the wood rotting and soft. The air was damp and cold, filled with the unmistakable stench of decay. My foot slipped on something wet, and I had to grip the railing to steady myself. My eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness, and that's when I saw it. At the bottom of the stairs, standing in the middle of the room, were my parents. But they weren't my parents anymore. Their skin was gone, replaced by a thin, translucent film that stretched over their bones, their faces elongated, their mouths impossibly wide. Their eyes were black, empty voids, and their limbs were twisted and broken, as though they'd been shattered and forced back together in all the wrong ways. They stood there, motionless, watching me, waiting. "We've missed you," Mom whispered, her voice no longer human, but a low, guttural growl. "It's been so long since we've had family." Dad took a step forward, his legs bending in ways they shouldn't, his bones cracking with every movement. "So long, since you came home." I backed up, my body shaking uncontrollably. I was trapped. The stairs behind me had crumbled, leaving me with no escape. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything, any way out, and that's when I saw it.